Edward Brown, host of The Best of Investing, here to remind you to tune in this week on Saturday at 8 p.m. We're going to be talking about real estate and the economy. You're not going to want to miss this show. That's The Best of Investing on Saturday at 8 p.m. Welcome. You're listening to The Best of Investing. I'm your host, Edward Brown. Our phone number is 888-912-1190. Use that number to answer the trivia questions for a 5-pack tanning certificate given away during this show. That certificate's not sponsored by the radio station, but by Tan Bella Tanning Salon with 2 locations in San Francisco and 1 in Marin. Today's trivia theme is miscellaneous trivia. Before I introduce our guest, I do want to make a mention for Pacific Private Money's fund called the Arrival Fund. It's still a limited time only. They're getting pretty maxed out at how much they're going to be able to raise. Accredited investors only, so you have to qualify, but they are paying 10%, and it's backed by first deeds of trust made on primarily on houses. So check them out at pacificprivatemoney.com to learn more, and please let them know that you heard about it on the Best of Investing radio show. All right, today we have a special guest, Doug Lynman. And let's see here. I'm going to read a little bit about Doug before we get him on the show here. So from a Marine to a Benedictine monk to financial expert. Wow, that's quite a journey. We're going to hear about that. So Doug, he used his unconventional journey to reflect his unique perspective on wealth and purpose. After graduating top of his class from the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, Doug spent 2 decades as a monk, leading a prestigious school's math department while earning a rigorous liberal arts education. Transitioning to finance in 2017, he became a partner at Longview Asset Management, overseeing $250 million in asset. His best-selling book, From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay, revolutionized the conversation around spirituality and wealth. Providing the financial success and ethical living go in hand, not just coexisting, but enhancing each other. In his latest work, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram, Doug combines the Enneagram with modern psychology to help individuals transform their financial behaviors. Today, he's a sought-after speaker and coach and helping clients align money with the deepest values and purpose. Hey, Doug, welcome to the Best of Investing.
Thanks, Edward. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Well, this is so cool. When someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, how would you like to have this guy who's gone from Marine to a Benedictine monk to a financial expert?" I said, "We gotta get this guy on the show. I want to hear this story." So, tell us about your journey first.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got the Cliff Note version there, but
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of backstory. I grew up in a relatively affluent family. My dad was, executive for an oil company, and great guy. Lots of good things to say about him. But when it came to money, my family divorced when I was pretty young, and then money became weaponized. It kind of became the tool that people used to kind of pit one person out against the other, and I sort of came away with this sort of really negative impression of the world of money and finance and the whole shebang.
Sure.
And I thought, well, what's a better way to sort of annoy my parents? What would be the most opposite kind of lifestyle from my parents? And first I tried the Marines, and I really enjoyed that immensely. Had a great time there. But I realized that, unresolved emotional issues and high explosives were probably a bad combination, and maybe I needed to find another path. I had a great time with it, but not the right career choice for me. So then I left and was looking for something higher, and then the best way to annoy my parents was to go become a monk and take a vow of poverty, and that worked out really well in that regard. But I also had real spiritual impulses, and there was real good reasons for doing it as well, and had a good adventure with it. One of the things I encountered, though, is that our monastery went bankrupt soon after I arrived, and then I had to learn about finance.
Wow. Okay, tell you what, we're going to go to our first commercial break trivia question here. It's so funny because I was just thinking about how during the Iranian crisis in '79, I had a couple of friends say, just give me a bunch of drugs and just parachute me down there and I'll just blast all the way. And so it just kind of reminded me when you said about that's not good. That's not a good combination. All right, here's our first trivia question, and a reminder to Doug, if you know the answer, don't say anything quite yet. When was the Declaration of Independence signed? That's our trivia question. Call 888-912-1190. First caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate, which, by the way, is worth over $100. Stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to The Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Doug Lynam. And our first trivia question, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? Doug, what do you think?
1776.
Yes, what would you know the date?
Well, it would be July. Was it July 4th?
See, July 4th is when it was adopted.
So
So
then
it
it
wasn't
was.
signed until August.
Oh.
August 2nd. I wouldn't have made you say exactly August 2nd at 6 p.m. or anything, but I was hoping somebody would know it would be August in August rather than July. It's funny. I'm sorry. When we went to break, I was just thinking about the idea that you had become a monk, a Benedictine monk, but then there was also this idea of later on becoming a financial expert. And if you go back to an old Odd Couple episode in 1975, I think it is, when they become monks temporarily, and Oscar Madison says they're gambling with cubes of sugar, using them as dice, and it says, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh." We're just trying to find out how mucheth. You're in the Benedictine, you're a Benedictine monk. And I mean, I think about it being quiet. Is that the stereotype?
That's the stereotype. It's actually, I find I have much more time for contemplation and reflection now because I have a lot more freedom with my time. There's just a lot to do. You're working full time. It was a teaching order, so we were all teaching full time, and then doing the monk thing full time. And there's a lot of caretaking that goes on. That tended to be an older, aging population. So there's health issues that have to be managed. So it was actually surprisingly busy.
I guess I would assume you have to qualify, right? You can't just walk in there and say, "Hey, I want to be a monk one day."
No.
I mean, do they make you you have to recite scripture or?
Oh yeah, this is a whole process like anything else. There's an initiation. There's usually a 6-month, novitiate, and there's all these weird terms like a postulancy, then a novitiate, and there's temporary vows, and there's final vows, and so basically you get a chance to get to know everybody, and they get to know you. And typically the process lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 years from when you can first kind of show up to when you can actually become a full monk, so to speak.
Huh. How long were you actually a monk then?
20 years.
Wow. Okay. Wow. You did go for a long time. How long were you in the Marines?
Well, I just went to officer candidate school, and then I graduated, and then basically turned down my commission. So I did not go active duty.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. And then how did that transition into doing finance?
Well, basically, the monastery at one point, as I mentioned before, went bankrupt. And so there was all these financial, it turns out we all took the vow of poverty a little too seriously. And we all had what I call money monsters, which is kind of in the title of my new book, Taming Your Money Monsters. And so a lot of it was like, why are all these really smart, bright, well-educated people having so much trouble with this thing called money, and myself included? Like I wasn't in, and so it was really this kind of weird. What are the weird psychological quirks that we all have that may make us, maybe less prosperous than we could be and probably should be? And then, what's holding us back? And that really became a question for me that I've really been kind of come to kind of I think I've come to an answer after all these decades. And
you have to take a vow of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that relate to suddenly? I mean, I guess you could still have you could be financially astute and be wise with, because you have to run the monastery
Right.
or whatever, without having materialistic thoughts, so to speak.
You're right. So it isn't about your and for a monastery, it isn't about your personal wealth. It's about the balance sheet for the community. And if the community is running in debt, right, and you're running in debt, and you've got deferred maintenance on property, and you've got all these things that haven't been taken care of, right, over time, it's like the amount of revenue coming in did not cover the amount of revenue going out, and that leads to all kinds of problems, as it would with any household.
Well, where do they get their money?
Well,
just regular donations?
Well, sometimes donations, and also we got some income from our teaching, and so those things together kind of made it all work. It wasn't really at some level we were okay in terms of the amount of money coming in, but there was so much debt and all these other problems that weren't being dealt with that it just kind of spiraled out.
And where was that?
Santa Fe.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, so suddenly you get transitioned into deciding, you know what, let me get into the money side of things.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, so basically, I probably should have left the monastery 10 years earlier, if I'm honest about it. Certain things have run their course, and you keep thinking it's going to get better, and actually, it wasn't. The community was aging, and there was no new
Yeah,
people coming in, and it was slowly dying. And as many monasteries these days are, they're closing left and right. And so, at some point, you're just like, this is not a viable long-term solution for me. I'll be the last one standing. I was the youngest monk by several years, and so
mm,
and I would stop growing. I kind of got to a point where there wasn't really any room for spiritual or personal growth, and so it was time to make a
well,
shift. And I thought, well, what? And I've been and by that point, I'd been teaching economics and finance for many years, and then I found out that one day for a class project for the kids, I opened up the school's retirement plan to see how it worked, to show them the nuts and bolts, just kind of, all right, how does this thing play out? And then what I found was a complete train wreck. There was no fiduciary oversight. There were all the fund performance was poor, the fees were high. There were lots of issues going on. I was like, well, could we find a better
yeah,
company to do a better job? And what I
sure.
discovered is that it was a problem endemic across America, across schools all in my region and across the country. And by a weird, fortunate bit of luck, so I thought, well, this is a pain point. I have an opportunity. And
Yeah.
then right when I launched my business, the New York Times did a 6-piece expose, one every month, about the problem of teacher retirement plans. And then they featured me in an article, and I hit the front page of the New York Times business section, and that went viral, and that launched my career.
It's very interesting. I love that. Okay, we're going to cut to our second trivia question here. Before we do, I do want to make a mention here for the San Francisco Bay Adventures. Excuse me, they have a premier boating event and tour resource for the San Francisco Bay for private events such as birthdays, weddings, and smaller groups or individuals can also buy tickets to public tours such as Sunday morning wildlife sales under the Gold Gate Bridge. Check out sfbayadventures.com or email info@sfbayadventures.com to book your adventure. Second trivia question: which animal's heart alone weighs as much as a grand piano? Call 888-912-1190. First caller with the correct answer wins that Danning certificate. Stay with us. The Best of Investing will be right back. Welcome back to the Best of Investing one more time. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Doug Lynam. Doug, see if you know the answer to this question. Which animal's heart alone weighs as much as a grand piano?
Blue whale?
Yeah, yeah, biggest animal up. Very good. All right, so far you're batting 500. That's good. Okay, so it sounds like you got like really fortunate with this article
Uh-huh.
that went viral. What year was that?
That was
2017?
yeah, around 2017. That's correct.
Okay, because I was reading your stuff before. So what happened? People started calling you and getting in
Yeah,
touch with you?
yeah, and that's that. Well, that was right when I left. I kind of left the monastery right at that point, and I was now working at Longview Asset Management, where I was a partner. And so, yeah, the phone just kind of rang off the hook, and business started coming in, and then clients started
Okay.
rolling in the door. And I got
What
two.
kind of clients?
What's that?
What kind of clients?
Well, to start, I was mostly working with schools and nonprofits, building better retirement
Okay.
plans. And then, one of the things I found is that it wasn't, as much as I enjoyed the work, it wasn't terribly lucrative. And I ended up moving a little bit more into individual wealth management with high net worth clients.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, for many years. I mean, I had my Series 7,
Mhm.
so I was doing the securities work from, 1983 to I think 1991,
Mhm.
92. And it was for me, it was hard because I didn't like it back then. The stock market, if it went up 100 points or down 100 points, that was like you get a phone call from someone. And I just don't, and even now, like it's like, 1,000 points will do it. And it's really hard because, I don't want to lose people's money.
Right.
And, and if they make a lot of money, it's sort of like they go to the cocktail party and say how smart they are.
Hmm.
Not that I need the accolades, but it's like I just didn't have the stomach for having to watch the paper every day, or watch now on your iPhone every day to figure out, are we up or are we down? Even if you do take the long view of things.
Yeah, a lot of it is just setting client expectations. Is setting, okay, we're into this. We're taking a buy and hold strategy, and we'll make market moves as appropriate. But we're pretty much going to try to stay the course, so that we've set the portfolio up in an appropriate way, so that they should be able to, navigate the slings and arrows of market outrageous fortunes, as they come.
Well, you said that move as appropriate. How do you know when it's appropriate?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think I can answer that.
I asked it.
I don't know how to answer. Well, let me say this. One of the cool things is I had partners who were really savvy investors, and I was really good at marketing client acquisition. So what I kind of did is I let my partners who had been in the business for 30 years handle more of the investing side, while I handled more of the client side. So I didn't actually have to be the one who's sitting there making trades all day and taking those phone calls. I was really the one out there just kind of, beating the bushes, and that was where my strengths were.
Okay, so and explain what Enneagram is and how does it reveal financial blind spots?
Well, the Enneagram, it's a kind of an ancient personality typology system. It kind of explains how your personality is structured, and it's kind of made a renaissance recently. And because we've been able to ground it in childhood developmental psychology and ground it in neurobiology, so we're finding that it really does have these robust scientific legs. And the American Psychological Association has a society, Journal of American Psychiatric Society. I'm getting that wrong, butchering it, but anyway, they found it, validated it, and basically the psychiatry field has adopted it as a valid system. But essentially, what it does is it tells you, in your personality, you've got a nature component and you've got a nurture component. So your nature is going to be your DNA, how your genes express, all those things. But the nature component is going to be the Enneagram. It tells you kind of how did your ego defenses form in childhood to protect you against the things that stressed you the most, and those stressors will create. Will determine both what the stressor is and then how you react to it determines what those ego defenses are. And then there's 9 basically different trauma responses. There's 9 core personality features in the Enneagram. And if you think like a fractal, the 9 types are just the top of the fractal. Like there's infinite variety inside this system. So it isn't static. But the point being is that then how you relate to reality in this key way, and then it tells you how you kind of relate to everything, but also it tells you how you're going to relate to money and finance, and that can be very, very helpful when you're dealing with all these complex financial issues.
Well, especially with this last couple of weeks in the stock market.
Right.
Has been just really, I definitely would say it's unprecedented because we never had these kind of swings, and you have a president who's really making a lot of decisions that other presidents said that they were going to make but never did. They never pulled the trigger on, with the tariffs and stuff, and so it's kind of open waters out there in a way. So let's see here. We got to go to a break in another minute. So what I'm going to do is just say what we'll talk about when we get back. So when we get back, we're going to ask Doug, what are the sacred wounds and how do they impact our money habits? Also, how can we build wealth while staying true to our values? And Doug, before we go to our break, how do people get a hold of you if they want to check you out?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is at my website, DougLynam.com. That's DougLyn as in Nicholas, AM as in Michael. Be the best way to reach me.
Great. Okay. Here's our third trivia question. Who was on the first cover of the Rolling Stone magazine? Who was it?
Ooh.
And I'll give you a hint. Just I'm not sure how much of a hint it is.
I think I got this one.
Really? Okay. So November 9th, 1967 is the year. We'll see when we get back. Doug, will let you answer that question. All right, call 888-912-1190. First caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate, which again is worth about $100. Who was on the first cover of the Rolling Stone magazine? All right, stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing. Don't touch that dial because we are going to be right back. Welcome back to The Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown along with Doug Lynam. Third trivia question, who was on the first cover of the Rolling Stone magazine? Doug, you said you didn't know the answer to this.
Oh, well, this is just a swing, a wild swing. I would guess Mick Jagger.
No, you're close though. I mean, close because it
Rolling
was
Stones of some
well, yeah,
sort.
well, yeah. I mean, one would think Rolling Stone. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, it was John Lennon.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
John Lennon, yeah. But you still are batting 333, and that'll get you into the Hall of Fame.
All right.
All right. So we are in the studio here, so to speak, the Zoom with Doug Lynman. Doug, where are you located?
I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Santa Fe, New Mexico. Okay, great. Let's see. Okay, so we told the audience when we got back we were going to ask stuff like, what are the quote sacred wounds, and how do they impact our money habits?
It's a big question. I'll try to be succinct. But your sacred wound, you have to think it like this. When you're born, you kind of pop out of the womb. There's a psychological umbilical cord that forms between you and your caregivers. So there's a physical umbilical cord gets cut, but then this psychological umbilical cord gets formed. So your ego isn't fully developed. And so, but then over time, you have to individuate, what in psychological terms, or differentiate from your caregivers and the rest of reality. And so your sacred wound is how that psychological umbilical cord gets cut. And we know from the neuroscience of it that there's really three core negative emotions in the human brain, and all the other negative emotions tend to ride off of those big three, which are anger, sadness, and fear. And so your sacred wound is, which of those three negative emotions did you get hit with a little bit more in your childhood? That's going to determine how that psychological umbilical cord is cut. And then there's three ways to process that emotion. You can internalize it. You can kind of give yourself an emotional wedgie. You can externalize it, which is like kind of having a food fight with the world, or you can do both. And that's why there's 9 types in the Enneagram, because there's 3 core negative emotions and 3 ways to process each of them. And then that determines your Enneagram type. And then I'm layering on top of that what I call the attachment. So you've got your type, and that's a whole thing. And then on top of that, I've layered what's called the attachment theory of money, which means there's 2 kind of core unhealthy ways we can relate to our finances. And it's based on the attachment theory of relationships, if anyone's familiar with that. And what it says is that we can be basically anxiously attached to money, or we can be fearfully avoidant of it. And so your Enneagram type and your attachment theory will tell you kind of how if you're kind of if you have an unhealthy relationship to money, assuming that, then how does that tend to express itself? It's going to express itself generally by being too overly anxious about it, or being more distant and avoidant. And that can occur in different areas of our life. So there's what I call the 4 pillars of finance, which is earning, saving, investing, and giving. So you could be kind of jumbled. You could be anxious in one area and avoidant in another. And so the book Taming Your Money Monster really explains first your Enneagram type, how it forms, what your personality traits are, and then how it's going to manifest in different ways, whether you're anxiously attached to money or fearfully avoidant of it.
Huh. Okay. Um, and so how do we build wealth while staying true to our values?
Well, I mean, so going back to those 4 pillars of finance of earning, saving, investing, and giving, the giving part, like, you kind of, that comes after you've kind of at least got your first 3 pillars in a row, right? A lot of people could have maybe jumped to the giving part a little too soon, but the question is what's the purpose of building all this wealth? Why are you doing it? And so, for me, the way I try to help my clients is like, well, the purpose of having this financial freedom is so that you can love and serve a broken world more effectively. Now you have this great tool in your utility tool belt to go out there and do some good in the world. And how are you going to do that? And and I really kind of go into your Enneagram type can help you determine a little bit, if you're floundering a little bit, like, what's my real purpose in life? What should I be focusing on? It can really help you find a little more clarity around those things. And then what are the causes, issues, and strengths that you have to bring to the world to help relieve the suffering of humanity?
Very interesting. Okay. And what surprising money psychology insights have you discovered?
Well, I would say, first of all, one of the big things I had to get over is that people who reject money, like, taking about poverty, monks, for example, sometimes a lot of that is what I call these money monsters that we have. The people who are avoidant around money, it can be just as toxic for you as someone who's too anxiously. We think of Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol being the greedy, money hungry person who, to their own detriment and of the detriment of those around them. But those are just 2 sides of the same coin. Both of them are equally toxic. That rejecting money for the wrong reasons and overly being obsessed about it for the wrong reasons are both kind of manifestations of these money monsters. It took me a long time to figure that out. That someone who's may appear air quotes, holy. And again, there are many holy people who take a vow of poverty for the right reasons, to live in solidarity with the poor. But a lot of people are there for the wrong reasons, is because they don't want to deal with the world, essentially. And that's
Gotcha.
a real. So
Yeah.
that was a big insight for me.
Well,
And
also, I think about the people who avoid it, but the problem there too is the fact that they've got responsibilities like a family,
right,
and they're irresponsible because they avoid it.
exactly.
Yeah,
Next,
because we all know about the Ebenezer Scrooge people. I
right.
mean that's an easy one, right? I'm greedy just for me. But you think about the other side of it, and yeah, that's pretty intense. Let's see, we have about a minute to go before our next break. From your what are you advising clients nowadays with what's going on in the market?
Well, that's a good
What
question.
do you see?
Well, so I'm no longer an investment advisor. I'm now a full-time author, speaker, and coach. But when people do ask me those questions, I'm like, well, what was your plan before all this hit? Like,
Mm.
how, let's take a look at what your strategy was, and does it still hold? Like, is this still the right course of action to take? And hopefully, if you've done things properly and you've got your asset allocation, properly, you're properly diversified, you shouldn't do anything, essentially, because the more you trade, the more you move money, the more money you tend to lose over time. Like trading
Yeah.
basically is a way to make your brokers rich and Wall Street rich and you very, very poor.
And you got to balance it because you can't stick your head in the sand either. Otherwise, you'd still be owning buggy whip companies.
Fair.
All right. Which was, by the way, was part of the original Dow Jones Industrial 30. Okay. All right, audience, no trivia question right now, but stay with us. We'll be back with some closing comments. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Doug Lynman. And Doug, again, if people want to talk to you about money and the psychological part of it, and maybe book you for any speaking engagements, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, go to my website, douglynam.com, DOUGLYNAM, and you can find me there.
All right, good. And I did want to take a little bit of time to discuss what's going on at Pacific Private Money, specifically with their Arrival Fund. So it's really interesting that they've kind of specialized in what they call the owner-occupied consumer bridge loans. So it's very similar to a bank, very similar to a mutual fund. People invest in a mutual fund and it's diversified amongst a bunch of stocks. This is a fund where it's diversified amongst a bunch of loans. But the interesting thing is that these loans are set up to be able to sell to some institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like these loans are going to be on the books for 35 years or anything like that. These loans are generally only 11 months to begin with, but they're being sold out every roughly 2 to 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. So they don't stay on the books that long. The minimum investment is $100,000. It pays quarterly, and it's paying 10%. So basically 2.5% every quarter. After there is a 1-year hold. After that, you can put in your redemption request. If you put it in earlier, there is an early withdrawal penalty. But you know what? It's seen this kind of business for years. I don't know if there's hardly anybody who ever puts money in and takes it out in a year anyway, right? And you can get you get the quarterly distribution, or you can reinvest it for a compounded yield. Probably adds another 35, 40 basis points maybe to it. And then if you need to get your money out, you just put your redemption request in, and they believe it'll take about 30 days to get your money back. Potentially could be shorter because, again, with these loans being on the books and then being sold very, very quickly, it doesn't seem to be a liquidity problem. And the interesting thing is people say, well, how can they pay that high a rate? Well, they're doing short-term loans to borrowers who need money quickly to close on a house, and they're willing to pay this extra money in points and interest just to get the deal done. So the average FICO score, I believe, is in the 700s. So these are not, deadbeat people who are looking for loans. They're normal people who just happen to run into one situation or another. Could be they've in fact, I just heard recently this one person they were saving so much money for their daughter's wedding. that they just weren't going to have enough for, to be able to go to the bank and get the loan temporarily, and they didn't want to sell their house first. So this is one way for them to buy their house, the next house that they want to buy, gives them time to fix up the old house. They don't have to move twice. And there's a lot of psychological part that you'll appreciate about that, Doug. And then they go ahead and they have time now to sell their house and then pay off the loan, or just refinance with a real bank. So for more information on it's called the Pacific Private Money's Arrival Fund, go to pacificprivatemoney.com. Check it out. Again, you do have to be an accredited investor. So the definition of that is, and if you're an individual making $200,000 a year or have $1 million net worth, or if you're married, you have, this is exclusive of your home, $300,000 as a couple, or $1 million net worth exclusive of your home, then at least you can qualify, because you do have to qualify. And tell them you heard it on the Best of Investing. We always like to hear comments from people that they are able to, it's a good cross promotion. We get more listeners, they get more investors. All right, now we're going to cut out for our. I don't have time for my silly joke of the week, but I do have time for our thoughts for the day. So I'm not a magician, but I once turned a back rub into 2 kids and a mortgage. and I always wonder what my mom and dad did to fight boredom before the internet. I asked my 18 brothers and sisters, and they didn't know either. All right, audience, tune in next week to The Best of Investing. We're going to be giving away more free prizes for answering trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm Edward Brown, wishing you the best of investing. So long.